Yeah, hi. Welcome you all to the Digital Fifth podcast. And this time we are having a very interesting topic to discuss, and which is very timely topic, which is generative AI in the fintechs, right? Unraveling the hype. So there are lots of buzzword around the generative AI, especially after the chat GPT. So here that we are going to have discussions with Mr. Alok Kumar, who is the head of engineering at the Perfios, right? And earlier also he was working with he was a co-founder and the CTO of the Karza. You all might be knowing that, right? So that will do that. Myself, Shashank Shekhar, the co-founder and head of consulting at the Digital Fifth. I'll having an interactions with Alok during these discussions and try to get into the different aspect of the generative AI and what are the different use cases that people are working into that. But before we just get started about maybe I'll just invite Alok for a quick introduction from him and then we'll get into the discussion. So Alok, if you can introduce yourself. Thanks.
Thanks, Shashank. Thanks for having me here. So since you've already introduced me, but what I want to add is, so what usually gets me really excited is the transformative power of AI, uh, and specifically in the world of fintech. And fortunately, I have seen firsthand how AI is reshaping the way, we are digitally onboarding customers to performing things like your credit underwriting, to even your background checks, fraud management, just to name a few. So here with Shashank, I'm really excited to sort of discuss the real world impacts, the challenges, and the incredible opportunities that GenAI brings to the table.
Yeah, thanks, Alok. So let's get started into discussion. I think before we're getting to generative AI, right? I think this buzzword has become more popular when the Chat GPT comes and everybody start talking more about the generative AI. But I think there is a long history goes behind the generative AI, right? With the artificial intelligence getting on a good ground and adoptions in the banking and financial services industry, especially fintech coming into the space, and they try to show that how the AI can be leveraged. So, but generative AI has taken a one step ahead where that you can try to make them your AI learn from the different data points, like large set of the data available with the organizations as well as the in the entire the landscape that we have the data in forms of the text, in terms of the images, videos, and all these things. And how do you using typically the model being used largely that large language model, which you plan to use to train your generative AI tools and try to make them converse in a very simple human language. Like that's where the typically chat GPT told you to do that. And that's where that we all as an individual experiencing that. But is that only the chat, it stays there, chat GPT, but all organizations are or can leverage better of the generative AI because organization, if you look at it, be it on any bank or be it on the fintechs or be it on any financial services, this sitting on a large set of the data, be it on forms of the applications that we have collected or the data that is stored into their core platforms or in the different kind of the documentation collected from the customers as a part of the onboarding journeys or as a part of the loan processings, as well as on the day-to-day business, huge amount of the data. So that's where that we are going to interact with Alok to understand that how the banks or the fintechs are using the generative AIs into transforming their digital journeys or digital engagement or customer engagement that we talk about it. And then we also try to touch upon some of these critical aspects that, okay, what are the use cases are there? What are the different impacts are is taking place within the organizations? What are the regulations? Are there any kind of the regulatory directions where primary organization need to be cognizant of? And as well as what are the typical requirements? Because lots of the question comes that okay, generative AI's adoption is not easy because of the huge resources, right? That's where also we try to understand from the Alok. So without wasting much of the time, we'll just get started with Alok. So Alok, first thing first, I think generative has definitely taken and everybody in the by a storm, right? And everybody keeps on talking every day. You pull up the newspaper and you see that lots more development is happening, right? And especially, I think where there's some of the leading entities of the world tech companies also putting lots of investment into the generative AI. So definitely, there's a huge potential. So first thing first, from your perspective, you're in a practitioner, you're a techie that who is building the solutions around the GenAI. So you are the best person to let the audience know that what is being by generative AI and how the generative AI is being used in the banks and the financial services, like how they are leveraging this generative AI as a technologies to plugging into different products or journeys. So with that, over to you, Alok, if you can just put some light on it.
Sure. So if you see generative AI, or in short, we call it Gen AI, that is actually built upon ideas which were already widely used in the field of deep learning. Concepts like transformers, GANs, reinforcement learning, these were actually used quite a lot. It's just that, what we did with LLMs for the generative AI is that we kind of took these concepts, and by having a much larger number of learnable parameters or weights and just pre-training them on significantly vast amount of data in an unsupervised manner to kind of arrive at a general purpose intelligence. And that is what has yielded, super exciting results that today we are associating with the generative AI. So broadly, if I have to put it in a slightly different way, generative AI is mostly focusing on sort of creating or generating new content. So these models are, rather than simply analyzing or categorizing the given data for a specific goal, what initially the models are trying to do is that, they are trying to analyze a vast amount of data. They're trying to learn patterns, and then basically once they've identified these patterns, they become so good at generation that they can generate various forms of media, such as you can generate text, in different sort of styles. It can generate images, videos, music, and even code base, something like kind of a co-pilot that a lot of organizations are also using quite extensively. So it's definitely an exciting time for Gen AI. And BFSI sector is just beginning to tap its kind of full potential. There are a lot of use cases that we're already seeing, one inside Perfios that we're working on, and also in general, we are seeing that there is a lot of innovations just happening across the board. So definitely super exciting times.
So look, just taking that questions further. So what are kind of the use cases that you see from the customer engagement? Typically, we see about it having a better customer engagement through the communication mechanism, or within the lending, or the journeys, or maybe the risk management and the fraud management. Where are that you see that banks are building on the use cases within that using the generative AI?
So definitely the first place where you see that a technology like Gen AI, which is actually powered by large language models, uh, you know, suddenly the understanding of text and the understanding of natural language has evolved at a next level. So anything where, let's say, historically you were relying upon humans to sort of, provide any kind of support, looking at different sort of structured and structured data points, that is definitely, getting automated. So your chat support, the next part, which again, what sort of you are also talking about, that given that these LLMs are really good at identifying the patterns in a completely scalable manner. So what we're saying is that, your use cases like, let's say, identifying different type of frauds, or even providing sort of because if you're finding an anomaly, it's sort of, you can have some sort of signals coming in that, hey, this is deviating from the usual pattern. Similarly, these sort of technologies or Gen AI is also being quite powerful in terms of understanding different type of data sources, because suddenly now you have a very structured way to look at content which was unstructured earlier, and in a very general purpose manner, now you can basically, have data in any format that you want. And this is coming in from, in any kind of documents, any sort of text data, or even sort of videos, or any sort of, media content. So that way, the ability to tap into data from different type of sources, that is again quite sort of empowering. And then beyond that, if you look at the personalization angle again, because the whole fundamental idea here is that now you have way more sort of, ways to kind of profile and figure out your users. So again, these are some of the high level, themes. There are, sort of individual pieces that different lenders are already trying to work upon. And in fact, we as sort of a B2B SaaS fintech, we are also working with some of these banks and some of these sort of PFSI players. And we are trying to empower them with some of the solutions that we were we are already working on, and second, also we are enhancing with the Gen AI to sort of, add more intelligence to these offerings.
Thanks, Alok. So now you have brought the point about that how the Perfios is using the GenAI to add the value to the customer. So maybe if you would like to throw some of the points
Sure,
or some of the initiative that you are working
absolutely.
for the larger audience to understand that.
Sure. Sure. So let's talk about, I was saying, sort of the hyper personalization angle itself, correct? Now, even if you look at any financial document, let's say a bank statement, it has plethora of information. Just looking at a bank statement, you can understand that, what is the spending pattern, what is the, income, source of income, various types of outflows that you're having, what are your spending pattern. Now, this is quite empowering because then suddenly you have way more ways to understand uh, basically how your customer or how the prospect is just by looking at, let's say, something as standalone as a bank statement. Think about this: if with one document you're able to sort of know this much about a customer, one is that you can lend better, you can better sort of underwrite, but at the same time you can also go beyond, let's say, very high level rules, and you can have way more parameters, and then you're able to sort of uh, uh, basically look at your customer in a much more granular manner rather than, let's say, looking at a typical sort of just a very high level decisioning where the information was not available earlier. Then the other use case, which broadly again we are working with various customers and that we have been working on, is the document digitization piece. Now, broadly, there are thousands of different types of document that any lender or any bank usually deals with, correct? Your identity documents, your financial documents, then there also you'll have subtypes. And then at our scale, the way we see that, these document formats also change across, sort of different organizations. So there's no one standard way of basically, representing this information. And then if I bring the angle of, different geographies, again, it's kind of, the amount of variations that one has to look into just becomes extremely complicated. So this is another area where we are sort of leveraging upon the generative AI, where we can build much more sort of generic models, which are kind of zero shot, few shot models. Traditionally also we had built models, but the way traditional models work is that you have to train them, and then your models tend to perform good on the kind of the noise, the kind of the samples, the patterns it has seen earlier. But where LMs are different is that you don't train them for a specific format or for a specific domain only. Rather, basically, the pre-training is where it acquires general purpose knowledge. So that is something which we find very exciting. So while we already have state-of-the-art accuracies for a lot of these documents, but when we are looking at new geographies, when you're looking at new use cases, new documents, we believe that GenAI gives you a more flexible and a more sort of a generic way to build it, because there is a life cycle when you're trying to traditionally train a model. So that's another area where we are seeing that our customers are going to like the agility, because earlier if they have a very new format, definitely there was a training period, and then you have to also, since you are spending time on training a specific type of model, the cost would be higher. The agility is definitely going to sort of help the entire BFSI sector. So that's another major piece that we are really excited about. Frauds again are quite powerful, because if you see the entire fraud identification, given the underlying strengths of LLMs to extract the underlying patterns, we also believe that LLMs should be one of the natural ways how you are looking at identifying the anomalies. So particularly there are two areas that we want to focus on. One is your behavioral fraud, which is where basically you're trying to see that, hey, a customer of this persona usually doesn't do these things, right? Why is this happening? So there's some sort of behavioral fraud. Maybe one is trying to mimic something so that the lender feels that, yeah, this is the customer is showing all the signs that we look out for, but it is faked, right? So how do I identify those kind of latent signals which are not easy to catch? That's the one behavioral fraud that is again sort of a big piece that we want to go deeper, and we're working on that. The other part is forensics itself, that looking at the content of the documents, or is something which is given to you is fundamentally tampered and all. So another big piece, because fraud still is a big problem, has been a big problem since a very long time. And lenders want to make sure that there's no fraud. Unfortunately, it's still not a solved problem. So I think another area where Gen AI is going to be quite instrumental, and we are focusing on that. Uh, so beyond the offerings directly, in terms of, let's say, a functional capability, one of the things that we were facing as a B2B player was that, as we are scaling, we definitely have to manage a lot of accounts. And then even for our customers, let's say, if they want to understand about our products, or they have any specific queries on, let's say, how things work, or out of 1 million requests, what happened to a specific request, they will either write an email or they will open up a ticket, and then someone has to check manually. So we are trying to transform that completely with sort of a self-serve portal where, our customers can come in and in real time at any point in time, right? They can understand what's happening with their individual request, so that the entire sort of experience becomes seamless. And this from a B2B angle, the way sort of lenders are working is that they're trying to do the B2C part. So where whatever portals they have, the support sort of the platform, the chatbots that we already have been seeing since last 2, 3, 4 years, definitely can be transformed, and they can be much more better, particularly with the racks and all coming in. Because now you don't have to, let's say, look at a menu-based chatbot, or your capabilities are limited. Rather, it's like you're literally speaking to a customer agent who can then look at multiple tools, multiple databases. So big pace. For us, it is, the scope is slightly limited. We are purely looking at it from a B2B angle, but from a B2C angle, I think the implications are even more larger for our customers. And I think this is, again, if I take a sort of a detour, but I think it's important, because usually when people are looking at Gen AI, they are trying to see that, what capabilities we can use, correct? What are the problems that it's solving? But something that we find also very, very, very powerful is the capability, or rather the usage of Gen AI to power your traditional models itself. So one of the sort of the problem statements that you'll always have with typical models, right, is that they need training data set because they are special purpose models, correct? And with some of the problem statements, we could see that the generative part of it, we could use it to generate data which was not available to us, right? So earlier, sort of, it was difficult because you have to create rules, and no matter how much you invest into your sort of the training pipeline, you won't get a sample as close to what you get, from the real world. But suddenly with the Gen AI, the samples and the sort of the way the characteristics are coming, they're becoming more and more realistic. So which is a fascinating piece for all data scientists, because suddenly they have way to also get the data that they always sort of crave for. So they are some of the the high level themes that I just like to highlight, what at Perfios is keeping us very excited on the GenAI space.
This is quite interesting. This is quite interesting. And the wide range, right, from the customer insights to the fraud management and to the journeys, right? In fact, these are like definitely are a complex areas on its own, right? But do you see also the generative AI getting into some of the complex kind of the assessment? Like, for example, my experience, if you look at it, in the lending, especially in the B2B lending, MSME or SME lendings, where that large set of the documentation get analyzed, right? Be it on the
Yes.
auditor's report, you look at it, you look at that, your ITRs, your GSTs, and then his annual reports and everything. So, and then typically the analyst has to prepare the credit application,
Cam.
right? CAM reports need to be prepared, which is again a kind of a documentary that you of the summaries that he is able to take it inside from the different. Do you see that kind of a generative AI getting into that areas of the solving some of these complex problem statements?
Absolutely. I think that's a very relevant question. Now, there can be multiple takes to it. I'm not, by no means I'm saying this is the only way or the most optimal way. But what the way, at least at Perfios, we're looking at it is, one is that CAM as a product we always had, correct? So now with CAM, we have guaranteed a certain accuracy, we have uh, guaranteed a certain pricing, and then we have a certain TAT, the overall latency, correct? Now let's say that if I try to do everything end to end with a generative AI model, which is by nature, it has a lot of entropy, which means that can you precisely control the behavior? Can you, let's say, guarantee the outcome? Almost impossible, correct? They are known to be undeterministic. That's one of the problems also, you can say, and that's, but from a creative point of view, that's a feature. Temperature, right? You set and then you find
Absolutely.
creative content, but purely from a use case, that a bank could be interested in, or a BFSI player be interested in. I don't want creativity, I want guarantee, right? I want consistency. So it's a little difficult. Still, GenAI has to sort of, go there. Second is that, say if you are able to apply, these documents are used, correct? You have 100 pager financial statements coming
Absolutely.
in. Uh, now if you apply Gen AI on these massive documents for each and every case, and if you just blindly do it, your cost will also shoot up. Be it internal models, or if you have an API, the cost is definitely much higher. In fact, some of the benchmarks that we have, the plain simple sort of the OCRs, the what we have built, which let's say takes, I won't use the absolute numbers, but just to give you a sense, the cost we are seeing is kind of moving to approximately, it's kind of 70x costlier, which is too costly right now. We don't want to burn our, let's say, the whatever you can say, correct, the margins, or forget margins, I might start burning money, correct, if my cost shoots up just like that. So which means that Gen AI is important, it's powerful, but we do not see it as a plain simple replacement of the existing techniques. If you do it, there are barriers today. It's not easy. But where we see, it becomes enabler is that, if you have a workflow that you're designing, and then that, what are the capabilities, let's say, or what are the areas where, you want to fit in Gen AI. So one is that you have the correct guardrails. Second is that areas where you need that intelligence. To cite an example, let's say that, in this case, if I'm able to say prune, and I know that, these are the X number of X, these are the areas where I want to extract some insights from a large language model, then suddenly I'm keeping my cost lower because I'm not asking it to look at each and everything, correct? So if I have some way to identify what is more important, what is less important, that's just one way to prune what I need to sort of pass to a much sort of, larger model. The second thing that we also look at is that, how do you kind of, you know, uh, basically you need to define the complexity of the problem statements. You have to break into modular pieces, and certain pieces your existing models might already be quite good, but few places where you believe, right, that this requires a very high level, reasoning capability, and that's where only for those specific aspects you can plug in Gen AI. And then basically, so again, it's kind of collaborating with the other systems. So the approach that we are taking is that, we have identified some of the areas. Example can be, let's say, I was talking about bank statements, let's say. Now your narrations, correct. Now, some of the narrations are extremely difficult, for example. Now there, I think Gen AI, if I have a simple rule, I see that, it's clearly written what it is. I don't need a Gen AI, a simple rule will also work. Right. I mean, I can obviously waste money and I can call a Gen AI to say that, hey, what is it? But if it's that straightforward, right, why do you even trigger a Gen AI? But if I see something, let's say, is a high, the transaction amount is higher, there are no obvious patterns, your typical, your data, your models which were trained on, a specific distribution is saying that, hey, my confidence is low, I don't know what it is. That's an ideal case for triggering an LLM, correct? So so I mean, these are some of the ways how we are looking at it, rather than just putting up this versus that. We believe that, it has to be the way we have always built systems, right? Even in the past when we had deep learning models, usually you need to have a pre-processing, post-processing pipeline. You need to have ways to handle one specific case where, something fails, because even a customer calls and says that, hey, this is not working. You can't always, your language models or any data science model is an aggregate model, right? You have a loss function, you want to optimize it for a batch. So if I start fixing it for individual samples, it's very difficult. Sometimes it's impossible also. So a lot of these aspects that basically every AI company has to keep in mind. I think that stays with Gen AI also. Generative AI doesn't change it. The onus of us owning the entire workflow, owning the cost, owning the accuracy is still with us. Where to plug in is where I think it requires a lot of thinking. So short answer to your question was that yes, we're already leveraging Gen AI. But what I want to expand here was that we are not throwing everything and just using Gen AI. Rather, we are plugging in Gen AI to the places where we want that to be plugged in. And second thing also is that, what we are focusing a lot on is that how do we build some sort of, uh, observability on the model behavior. That's important because one day we'll have to also, work on the explainability part, that if something is happening, why is that happening? How do we build the confidence measures? LMs are really sort of, infamous for hallucination. Just few days back, there was a paper published, and I'm yet to read, but I think there are some interesting, concepts shared around hallucinations. So something that we want to try again, because when you're dealing with a bank, they don't want to hear it's LM or what. They want to hear that, why did you guys group up the sample, correct? So that's where, I think these are the parts where players like us, and any user of LM needs to innovate and make sure that you are building what you need to survive, and solve the specific use case. But otherwise, LM as a concept is quite powerful, and that's where we're working on the auxiliary part and not giving up on the kind of the intelligence that these models have.
So thanks, Alok. Amazing insight. And you also brought up a very important point, which is probably again linked to my next questions, right? The cost aspects, right? And building generative AI kind of a model and trained with a large set of the data is not an easy, because you require a huge set of the infrastructures, right? Investment into the hardware or the software, right? So what is your understanding? What does it takes to build right generative AI based model, and how the organization should go about it? Like you already pointed out, like you also need to look at that what actually you want to look at it, right? If the traditional techniques can help you to do that, but I just want to pick up your brain into that. What typically it takes to build into the generative AI model? How do banks go about it? And what are the options that they have? If they, many of the banks may not have that kind of the pulse to invest into that building that large server stack and then deploy that LLM model. But what are the other options that do they have?
Great points, Shashank. So, see, when we talk about effectively using generative AI, definitely what you spoke about is crucial, that, the hardware requirements as well as, let's say, the software requirements. But also, I think the ecosystem that supports its deployment and use. So probably I'll try to break it down into a way so that it's slightly easier for consumers to sort of digest. So see, first thing is the hardware, correct, that you spoke about. Definitely, state-of-the-art GenAI models are very expensive computationally. They require, specialized sort of hardwares, GPUs or even TPUs, another sort of, promising areas, at least the Google kind of, that's TPUs were kind of built by Google itself. So that way, definitely, there's a lot of investment, on GPUs and TPUs. A lot of times we also hear that, few organizations, they say that, hey, we don't have GPUs. I mean, they clearly say that, if you're talking about GPUs, we don't have anything, forget about it. So that's definitely is a concern. Plus also, we if let's say one is trying to fine tune LLMs, or you want to probably optimize any sort of an open source LLM to your specific use case, then usually you tend to have a lot of data also, because if you just a few thousand records, why will you sort of fundamentally, so if you want to create foundational LLMs, that is a massive investment. So a data set, you also need to have a data lake, because you don't want to just train it on the obsolete concepts, correct? If you remember the old ChatGPT days, it used to say that I don't have data till this. There was a cutoff date, correct? One of the fundamental problems. So if one is looking at foundational models, again, not just training cost, but also you'll have to invest into the entire sort of the ETL pipeline, the data lakes. So, how do you keep the data refreshed and all of that? And also many times, if let's say you have an LLM and you want it to work or reason on your organization, or specific, or you want to reason it specific to a customer that you're dealing with, then you'll have to further extend and you'll have to introduce RAGs. RAG is basically a concept which is used to kind of, dynamically pull in the context which is required for your LLM to analyze. And usually RAGs require a vector database. So again, sort of, extra cost in terms of the infrastructure and all. So broadly, yes, it is intensive in terms of the hardware. If let's say one is looking at, training and fine tuning the LLMs from scratch, or they want to do a lot of engineering in terms of RAG and other things. The software aspect is also interesting actually, because while if you look at so generative AI, if I talk about the large language model part from a software perspective, it's fine, because broadly the frameworks like, let's say, a TensorFlow or a PyTorch or a Keras, they had been existing, and broadly most of the deep learning engineers, they have been working on them. So it's not that they will have a very high learning curve. So this is fine. But something new has come up in terms of the softwares and frameworks, which is actually quite different. And there was nothing like this almost even a couple of years back. If you look at prompts, they have become mainstream now, correct? There's a lot of work, there are a lot of frameworks in terms of how do you manage prompts. There are a lot of techniques also just to manage prompts. We have, computer science algorithms are proposed now. So it's just quite fascinating that, prompt which started as something just guiding the model, when you try to build entire sort of, ecosystem around prompts. There's an entire framework, there are entire best practices, and then there are ways to implement computer science algorithms without prompts as well. And that brings me to the last thing, which is very hot nowadays, is your agents, right? And the entire agentic framework, where you have the words like AutoGen, Crew AI. These things are not there. So there's definitely a lot of learning curve in terms of the sheer amount of research papers which are coming purely on prompts and on agents and these frameworks tools. So it's difficult to find, even sort of, I'll say, resources, today who are, let's say, very well versed with these sort of frameworks, and folks who can say that, hey, I have trained a foundational model, or let's say folks who say that, I have fine-tuned a large language model, this is the data required, this is the pattern that I have seen. So there's also a challenge of the resources, correct? If I look at it, because these concepts are so new that broadly, if you are not, let's say, part of one of the larger sort of the giant AI organization, or you are not a AI first org who has been working on LM since last 2 3 years since the onset itself. Uh, in the market, in the ecosystem, people are still kind of figuring it out, and new things are coming up very rapidly. So there's another challenge which is also quite real. Now coming to some of the ways, or practically how I see that it is being navigated or can be navigated, at least in the initial stage. Definitely, the good part is that similar to a deep learning ecosystem, even the LM ecosystem is kind of still quite open. So people are sharing the research papers that, what worked for them, how did they train their foundational models, what were their observations. These agentic frameworks, they are being open sourced also. There are papers being published. So, you can actually go and read, and you can also build your knowledge. You can learn from others' experiences, which is a good thing, actually. That's kind of empowering and democratizing the knowledge on these concepts. But still, people have to keep on reading. You have to invest. It's not that something people are aware. uh, Now, I'll start with how the challenges can be navigated, and how, including us, we are trying to sort of figure it out. So one is, see, the strength of LMs is that they are very good in terms of general purpose learners. So you don't always have to think about that, hey, like a typical learning model, that you have to always train it on your data set. It's not always required. So if you are lucky, and then things are working decently well for you, then I think you just need to work on the prompt engineering. And prompt engineering, I think, doesn't require, it requires more of the intent, I will say, and a good logical reasoning, logical thought process, rather than knowledge of any specific data science concept, to be really honest, at least when you begin your journey. So there, I think prompt engineering with using off the shelf an API, like, let's say, coming into a Microsoft Azure or GCP or anyone, or even directly you can have APIs from GPTs of the world, right? And they work quite well. So you don't have to always, let's say, reinvent the wheel and say that, no, I want to host it on my data center, until unless you have some reasons, and there can be reasons related to compliance, or, sort of data security and all of that. But then there also, I think one can think about that, if, let's say, for your decisioning, the actual name or the actual number doesn't matter, you can mask or you can change the numbers, right? Then basically you're not leaking any sensitive data. And even these providers, they have understood the concerns, and I see that their teams have a good sort of legal work. And then when they get into meetings, they have sort of work that how they are taking care of compliance and agreement. For example, when you look at any cloud provider, they're trying to say that, hey, we have the same TNC that we give for any other service, so do not treat LM as something different. Correct. So that way, that's the one step which is good. If you have something from one of the state of the art models, if they are working well for you, and they do also many times, use it. At least in the initial stage, when you don't have massive volumes, when you're not tested across samples, when you're not build the in-house expertise, have the runway, and then internally sort of work on these things. The second part would be, I'll say, the workflow that we're discussing, that do not try to commit to it fully, or try to say no to everything. Try to figure out those sweet spots and then plug in it, the way we engineer. I mean, this is nothing different. I mean, our core concepts should remain the same, that try to figure out the optimal workflow, and everything else is just a tool. I mean, the LMs are not the solution, they are part of the solution. You have to keep that in mind, because LMs are overwhelming, right? Sometimes we get overwhelmed that, wow, how powerful is it? So suddenly you feel that this is a solution, but it's not, it's part of the solution. So if we keep that mindset, I think it gives you more ways to sort of address them. So we spoke about sort of the cloud offerings and how sort of the prompt engineering can help. The other part I'll say also is that fine tuning is another interesting area. And when I look at fine tuning, uh, uh, the intent is that, right, we have already established that off the shelf models are not working well. So when you want to fine tune, definitely it yields promising results, but then typically you'll have to have GPUs, otherwise the performance will take a massive hit. But then you have tiny LLMs coming in, so the good part is that your every LLM sort of is coming in different sort of model weights. So see that if you can afford to fine tune, and if your problem, because then let's say you can have two options. One is that you try to have one generic LLM which solves all problems that your company has, or let's say you can pick two tiny LLMs and you can train one specific to one use case, second specific second. There are pros and cons. There's no better way or sort of to do it. But then there's also an art that sometimes having two models might make more sense. So again, something that one has to keep the eyes open. Do not try to take a binary decision that hey, we will have everything with one LLM. Let's take the most powerful LLM and then we'll fine tune that. If you do it, yes, you have less maintenance overhead, but at the same time, you are burning more money for each and every API call. Even if one use case is very easy, why do you want to give that particular model, let's say, 128 million parameters when that can be solved with just 8 million or 8 billion or, sort of 64 billion parameters. So again, there are variety of LLMs. One should understand the complexity and then one can very well sort of create. And I believe that the good implementations will again have workflows where you try to sort of break your problem statements and try to get a lot of things done also by tiny LLMs. You don't always need a very powerful LLM, for all the problem statements. And I think see cloud everyone understands now, so I don't have to say why cloud is usually a better choice when you're looking at your deployments and all. But these are some of the things that I just wanted to share as a practice now, something that has helped me and the team to sort of navigate these choices.
Oh, this was quite useful, Alok. This is quite useful. And you try to explain it pretty easy. I think people will find it definitely valuable. So, just last piece, I think we're coming towards the end of the podcast. So, what are the other, like, while the banks continue to build it or financial issues continue to build it and adopt different GenAI for different use cases, what are the regulatory things or, say, for example, compliance elements that they should be cognizant of? Now, there is no specific regulation per se, but from your understanding, what are they need to be cognizant of and they need to take care of it?
Sure. So as you said, right, there is no specific separate sort of a law or a guideline specific to LLMs directly. Uh, but I believe that we need to stick to the first principles, which is what usually keeps on coming, right? And now particularly the DP or the way we call it, sort of the personal data protection bill. With these kind of things coming in, I think we have to be very sensitive about the PII, those kind of data points. uh, and also so first thing is that it's not just about LLM but any external API. If you're calling any sort of an API or any you're passing anything outside of your environment, if that extra piece of info is not adding any value, don't even pass, correct? Or if you can mask something without compromising on the quality of the output, just do that. So that is one thing which is again, it's not specific to legal or compliance, but again, from a practitioner point of view, I think that's really important. I've seen that also being leaked at times. People just send more data even if it's not giving you anything. Second is that particularly as I was saying that it's good to get sort of that legal scrutiny because what I'm sensing now is that these the providers themselves, at least from the legal and compliance standpoint, are trying to sort of have deployments in your geography. Then they are having sort of other controls. They're trying to come up with the same level of compliance and adherence that other sort of offerings they have. So usually my take is that if we are looking at these sort of solutions, working with one of the largest CSPs would be better if you're looking at SaaS offerings, because they have invested in these things. Even if you ask for a compliance report, if you look at a SOC 2 report and say that, is your LM server covered in that, there's a higher chance you'll get that. And they already invested billions in that, right? So it's always good. A company might be great at generating GenAI sort of models, but have they really invested in the overall infrastructure, the compliance layer? They will start doing it, correct? So someone who's already done it, that way I prefer sort of personally looking at the CSPs, the major CSP, the top threes. The other part also would be, kind of which is specific to models, is that the way these LMs have been trained, and that to be honest is a gray area. I think the entire world is waiting what eventually is going to happen. That the kind of the data on which it has been pre-trained, right? You've scraped everything.
That's true.
What was permissible, what was non-permissible, it's difficult to say. We have to just trust the words of these providers. Now I see a new trend is coming in. At least a lot of small players are doing that. They're saying that, hey, the giant LMs, they were trained on the entire data. We actually look at the permissible licenses, and this is particularly true about, let's say, a code generation sort of a product. They will say that we looked at GitHub. If the license is permissible, then only you scrape that data. So I think people are getting it that this is becoming a serious thing. But given that there's no clear law still, or there's no clear way to know that what was used, what was not used, there's still a gray area. So to be really honest, we have to be just a little watchful, that what exactly is going to happen. But the good part is that, what I'm seeing is that definitely there's a maturity coming in, because of the incidents which happened in the past, people suing some of these giant, basically, GenAI players. I think there is definitely a kind of, an awareness and sort of an attempt by these guys also to see that if they can sort of use permissible stuff only to pre-train their models and not use anything. But definitely that can be a gray area. I don't know personally that how that can, play a role. Say that you use a GenAI product and then, uh, you know, and a lawsuit, comes basically, can it come your way also? To be honest, that is still something that I'm not very clear personally. And the other part, which is also particular to GenAI, which is true for any model, is that your bias and sort of, the fairness angle of a model. As we are going to rely more and more on these models, I think we need to weigh more in terms of evaluating whether these models are biased or not. Our test cases need to be much more stronger, because unlike a typical development paradigm where you say what you want and the engine does what you have said, this is different. You're not training it for a specific objective. So what patterns it has learned, it's very hard for anyone to come out and say. So I believe that that's one piece which requires lot of innovation, and how do we do it is something that we are yet to see. And last but not the least is something which I believe that all of us should continue doing, is that working closely with, regulators, explaining them that how these models are different, taking inputs from them proactively rather than waiting for them to take an action and then we react. So it's important that we keep the channels open since early days and we get the feedbacks proactively as a suggestion rather than, let's say, as a kind of a consequence of whatever happened.
So thanks, Alok. And I think it was quite learning experience for me also in the last 30 minutes interacting with you on this interesting topic. So I think, guys, we could able to cover large aspects of the different parts of the generative AIs, right? So learning from the different use cases, be it on the customer insights, if we talk about it, or understanding the use cases within the lending or the journeys, as well as also fraud management. So we could touch upon, right? And also it was good to know that what Perfios is trying to build it into, expanding into the what are the analytics already they have been providing into the various data sets that they've been providing to their banks and the customer, adding the layer of the generative AI to bring it the more deeper insights into that different use cases. I'm working very closely with the banks to, especially on the hyper personalization, on the fraud management, or different aspects, right? And also it was good to learn through the process about that, what are the options that you have to adopt these generative AIs, even though the investment of the setting up or the training cost may be higher from your own infrastructure, but there are options available, as Alok spoke about it. Great, Ayok. Thank you very much. Thank you for being with us and taking your time to walk us through the different aspects of generative AI. Yeah, thank you very
Thank,
much. Thank you very
Thanks a
much.
lot, Shashank. Thanks for having me here. It was fun chatting with you. Hopefully this was useful.
Thank you. So I think, yeah.
Thank you then.